I will pass over to you, Bhante, and thank you so much.
Okay, so this week's or this month's topic is "This changes everything." And the reason that I have kept this phrase in my mind is because in the early days when I was still seeking around for some kind of philosophy, something worthwhile in the world to hang on to, different teachings and ideas would appear to me, or appear to my understanding, I should say, as competing ideologies. I'm reminded of Richard Dawkins and his idea about memes. And memes are ideas that compete with each other for human attention. So politicians, for example, you've had an election in Australia, they are having some leadership challenges in Britain, and in Thailand there will be elections later this year. And the politicians will always try to raise their stories as being the most important story that you absolutely have to think about. And this is the idea of memes, that stories compete for human attention. So when I looked around the different philosophies, I would see these stories competing for my attention, competing for my belief. Do I believe in the Old Testament or the New Testament, or different forms of Christianity, different mystic religions? When I was first started out in this spiritual path, one of the big guys at the time was called Papaji, and he was a Indian mystic. We believe to be enlightened. Of course, how can you tell? You need to have one of those Facebook quizzes where they ask you 25 questions and then they tell you what nationality you are, or tell you how old you are, or something like that. We need to have one of these and for spiritual teachers, and then we can see if Facebook determines whether they're enlightened or not. So people at the time were leaving the monastery and going to see Papaji. I went to see him myself, but I was only there for a few days before I carried on to Thailand to ordain as a monk. So these different philosophies seem to compete with each other until, from my own point, I didn't know which philosophy was the right one, which one changes everything. And this is why I chose Buddhism, because it held out the promise of something that's completely other than normal stuff, the normal way of life, different experiences that you can have, different attainments that you can make. Buddhism seemed to hold out the promise of something completely separate to all of that. I should say every mystic tradition, in fact, holds out this kind of promise that there is something else or something other than every other thing. So this something else, something other, this enlightenment is something that's dangled in front of us. But of course, our difficulty is we don't know what it is. With other things, other ideas and philosophies and attainments, we can go and test it or read it or think it, and we know roughly what it is. If we want to talk about Nietzsche, or we want to talk about Maori religion, or you want to talk about, national energy supply, we can go and read about it, and then we know what it is, and we can make our decision on it. But with enlightenment, this is completely different, because we don't know what it is. And this can be off-putting, but for me, I found this to be encouraging, because the idea that I had had from Christianity growing up, and I wasn't really involved with the church in any particular way. But the basic premise was, here is the truth, it's written down in this book, and what you need to do is believe it. And that didn't really work for me because I didn't believe it. The prerequisite for entering into that spiritual tradition was you have to believe the whole thing, hook, line, and sinker. And I didn't believe it, so I had no way into it. It didn't seem to make sense. Buddhism holding out, or let's say mystic traditions holding out this principle that there is something that you don't know what it is. It's outside of every experience that you've ever had. It's nothing within the whole framework. It's not within the paradigm of your normal daily life and experience. And the only way that you can know it is to actually go and experience it directly. This, on one hand, is putting your faith in something that you don't know what it is. And that is, as a prerequisite, makes a mystic tradition rather difficult. But on the other hand, in my belief, I think our psyche is built in such a way that it is continually collapsing. Our experience is continually collapsing. And this collapse points us towards the thing that lies outside all of our experience. What I mean by collapsing is you can get caught up and involved in an idea, in a fantasy, in a romance, in a movie, in a job, in a career, etc. Whatever it is that you can get caught up and involved in, after a while, the energy of that thing will collapse and start to dissipate in your very hands. And this is something that personally I could really relate to, because I would definitely get caught up in something for a while and then it would just collapse. The energy behind it would collapse. So for a while, in the late 1980s, I got into Keep Fit. And at that time, everybody was starting to go to a gym. It was a new thing. And I was working in catering at the time, and I'd worked 14-hour shifts. And then I went to the gym and they tested all my metabolism. And I was off the charts for fitness because I run up and down the stairs all night, collecting meals, waiting on tables, working on the bar, dipping down into the cellar. I was frightfully skinny. I was so thin because I metabolized all my food, and I was off the charts with fitness. And they said, basically, there's nothing we can do for you. So Keep Fit for a while, that was something that I could keep going. And then it collapsed right in front of me. And then I had a couple of brief teenage romances. They didn't go very far. I didn't enjoy it very much. I was never enthralled to romance the way people were around me. Basically, all the boys and girls, from the age of 16, all get so heavily into this and hooked into it. And it really didn't pull me in the way that it did with all my friends. I can tell you a funny story about that later if you want. I did a psychology test on it's a way to delve into the mind about what you feel about sex, sexuality, and relationships. And when I was tested, I came up with quite a funny response. So in my view, everything that I've ever had collapses right in front of me. And this collapsing, when everything stops, this is actually when we start to enter into the spiritual experience, into the mystic experience. Because you start to experience what consciousness or life force or the it actually is, independent of all the things you can think about and experience and want and desire and create. You start to enter into that simple, direct, naked, raw experiencing, which is the heart of the mystic tradition. And this is what saints and sages and mystics have been doing over generations, in every land, in every culture, throughout, in every time, you've had these people who have withdrawn somewhat from the society around them and entered or tried to enter into this spiritual communion or mystic communion. In Christianity terms, it's called union with God, or sometimes identity with God. And this is separate from the day-to-day religion. The day-to-day religion deals with beliefs and customs and rites and rituals and all that kind of thing, which is important and is useful and gives a structure to society or people's minds. But it's not this raw, naked, direct experiencing of something other. So this the thing that we can start to enter into when everything else ceases or collapses, this is the heart of the mystic tradition. And this is the thing that is presented or dangled in front of us as the path to enlightenment, which means if you enter into this experience more and more directly, and with more and more commitment and dedication and totality, then something great and something beautiful arises that isn't there in every other experience. So as a promise of enlightenment, I bring up this story, which I did actually mention last month with you guys. A few people here weren't here last month. I got confused about which month I was going to tell which story, so forgive me. But the story goes like this. There was a king who invaded a neighboring kingdom, and having won the battle, he said to his soldiers, okay, you can run around in the palace now, and everything that you can find, everything that you can put your hands on is yours, you can keep. So the soldiers went crazy, of course, and went running around and putting their hands on everything they could find of value, all except for the king's page or attendant. And he just stood there, and the king said to him, the conquering king said to him, why aren't you running around? Why aren't you finding things to grab hold of? And the page said, I'm not really sure I believe you. Are you saying that we can have anything we can put our hands on? The king said, yes, I promise you. So the page walked up to the king and put his hands on the king's crown. So according to the story, the king laughed and said, yeah, you're not having my crown. But he did adopt the boy as his son and heir, and later on that boy became the king. Now, obviously, becoming a king is not something that we actually aspire to. For most normal people, it would be a hellacious job. I was watching in an Australian program called Gruen. I don't know if some of you, Sarah, watches this, but they were talking about the Australian election a couple of months ago. And the guy on the program, they're not partisan, they're interested in the campaign strategies. They're not interested in who wins. He said, yeah, whoever wins is going to have a horrible job because 1/3 of the country immediately hate his guts. He will have teams and teams and teams of people following his every single announcement from the past right up to the present, his every hand gesture, his every bit of body language, trying to tear him apart and make him look like an idiot, make him look like a liar. He said, who on earth would want to have a job like that? So he's quite right. The idea of becoming the king in the story is not the thing that we should be aspiring to. The point is that we should be aspiring to the ultimate. And it's so easy to get caught up in what we can put our hands on that we forget about what is actually real, has real value. And so that's why the soldiers would put their hands on things and then it belongs to them. Well, that's how most people live their lives, running around, putting their hands on objects and new things and new experiences, and miss this simple, raw, naked experience that starts to arise when your mind stops grasping, when your hands stop reaching out for things, when we enter into the spiritual path. So the story of the boy collecting the crown of the king is meant to tell us not to get caught up in greed and grasping, but to look around within the experience and find that which is truly worthy. The king, by the way, always represents the self. The king, or often you have a prince and a princess who get married. When these two come together, both parts of it, you need them masculine and the feminine. When the prince and the princess come together, that represents your true self or your potential. I like this word potential. In Mahayana Buddhism, they talk about Buddha nature, but the actual word for Buddha nature, Tathagata Gaba, actually meant potential. So these days we talk about it as being your real self or something like that, but that's not the meaning. It meant your potential or your ability to be enlightened. That is your birthright. It's not something that you have to get or something that you have to attain. It is your birthright. It is yours by right and by nature. However, you have become deluded. So you are not already enlightened. You have work to do. So that was the meaning of the story. And this is where I came upon the quotation by Sogyal Rinpoche. And I'm going to go to screen sharing. And I'm hoping that the quotes will appear full screen on you. It does depend on your own settings within Zoom, but you should be able to see. Maybe somebody can just give me a thumbs up if you can see the main screen. Okay. So Sogyal Rinpoche said, Samsara is the mind turned outwardly, lost in its projections. Nirvana is the mind, or the Pandit, turned inwardly, recognizing its true nature. Okay, I typed this up just an hour ago. I haven't had time to read it. So by Pandit, obviously I mean mind. So what Sogyal Rinpoche here is saying, and I like this because he's a Tibetan, and in a few minutes I have a Zen quote, and then after that I have a Theravada quote, all pointing to the exact same thing, which, as I was saying before, when your experience collapses, when everything ends, but awareness is still there, that's when the enlightened nature or awareness starts to reveal itself or gets turned upon itself. Sometimes you can call this awareness of awareness. So the mind turned outwardly, there are a few different ways that we can categorize this, but the most common way that was used in Theravada Buddhism was the 6 senses. So this means that you see something, and having seen it, you like it or you dislike it. Liking and disliking, there's a Pali word called nandi, which means to hold in the hand. Sometimes you use the word grasping, but I like this word nandi, just to hold in the hand. Because we hold in the hand things that we both like or dislike. So you see something that you like or you dislike, and your mind gets caught up in that thing. You get attached to what in Theravada is called the signs and features of that object. So you see a beautiful girl or a beautiful boy, whatever you fancy, and the eye is drawn out to it, and it's very beautiful, and you look and you examine you get caught up in the signs and features. And while you are looking at that person, you are not feeling the feeling in your feet. You're not listening to the sounds in your ears. You're not looking at the time. You're not thinking about philosophy. Your mind is caught up with that particular object. And then you hear something with the ear and the mind gets drawn out to that thing. Right now, outside my temple here, we have a girls' school. And for the last 2.5 years, it's been closed due to COVID. And it opened just actually only a month ago. 2.5 years of peace. It was beautiful. And it's not the school kids that make the noise. They scream and you hear it, but that's kind of nice. It's the teachers that get on the loudspeakers. Also, right now, somebody down below has decided they're going to raise a chicken. And one of the things that really grates on my consciousness is the sound of chickens screeching. And I find it hard just to ignore it. Fortunately, I'm 4 stories up, so the sound isn't ear splitting, but even so, it comes into my ear, it grabs my attention, and I get caught in the signs and features of that sound. It means my consciousness latches onto that sound, and now I'm listening to the chicken. While I'm listening to the chicken, I'm not looking at the internet. I'm not feeling the feelings in my knee. I'm not thinking about philosophy. I'm caught up with the chicken. And so on and so forth. The consciousness will latch onto one thing after another thing after another thing. And this confusing, continual experiencing or perceiving of things, with the mind leaping from moment to moment to moment between different perceptions, is so confusing and so dismaying and difficult to assimilate, that what we do is we construct stories. And these stories act as rules of thumb. So you enact an identity. I'm a Buddhist. I'm a Australian. I'm a Labour supporter or Liberal supporter. I'm an Asian. I'm a computer engineer. You get caught up in your activities, in gardening, or for me, it's Photoshop. I used to get caught up for hours upon hours in Photoshop. These are ways that we try to construct something solid out of effervescent reality. And to a large degree, our ability to do that will determine whether you are a sane and functioning human being or not. There was a saying by Freud or somewhere along the line, he said something like, our objective as a psychotherapist is to take someone from a dysfunctional state of confusion into a non-threatening functional state of confusion. So basically he meant we take people who cause trouble and turn them into people who are no longer causing trouble in society. And that's the success of psychoanalysis. Well, this effervescence of the mind, this continual rapid changing of experience of the consciousness leaping from one thing to another thing, is not indicative of an unhealthy lifestyle. It's not that the modern day we're caught up with our phones and blah, blah, blah. It's always been like this. This has been the nature of consciousness always for human beings. And if we're not bouncing around from one experience to another experience, we're falling asleep. And when you're asleep, your mind is still bouncing around from one thing to another thing to another thing, continually picking up something, letting it go, picking up something and letting it go. One of the interesting correlations or concomitants, is that the word, of this, is that according to Buddhist philosophy, you only suffer from things that you are currently looking at. This is an interesting conclusion that in psychology is not the case. Freud said that you can suffer over things that happened to you as a child, even while you're not remembering them. But in Buddhism, when we talk about suffering, we're talking about specifically the thing that's in consciousness right now. So if you think about something that makes you suffer, thinking about your pet who is dying, or your society that you think is falling apart, or your past or your future, or your mortgage payments, things that may be very real and need attention, but they only cause you suffering when you bring them into your mind. I've played around with this a lot because I can call things into my mind that make me suffer. Things that people have said to me, things that people have done to me, things that I feel are unfair. Did you ever notice that you only think things are unfair when you feel that you're badly done to? When you get something that is really good, that you didn't deserve, you don't complain that it's unfair. Did you ever see somebody winning the lottery and complaining, it's just not fair? Why should I win the lottery and not this other person that's more deserving? Why should I get the promotion over this person who's actually better than me at the job? It's not fair. Nobody ever complains about it not being fair when they get something good. Things not being fair means that you want something that somebody else has got. I see this a lot with the modern obsession with social justice. You know, it's just not fair that that group gets something and my group doesn't. And then, of course, different groups start to clash about what they think is fair. So all of these things, the mind leaping from one thing to another thing like this with moment-to-moment consciousness, what we are doing in meditation with withdrawing from the stories of the world, leave the world as it is, with all its politics and disasters and past and its futures and its histories and its warring nations and its beautiful things and great experiences. You withdraw all the mind from all of those stories that give cohesion to our experience in the world, and we turn it to just mindfully seeing the mind from moment to moment. If we do that, we see one perception arise, hold your attention for a while, make you suffer over it, make you desire over it. Remember, Nandi, holding, is with suffering or pleasure, pain or pleasure, doesn't matter. It's something that you're holding in your consciousness. Makes you like it or dislike it, want it or not want it. That thing collapses out of your mind and another thing arises, and then another thing and another thing. Moment to moment, your entire experience is collapsing right before your eyes. For most people, they have no notice of this. They don't see this because you're so busy grasping onto the next thing to think about, the next thing to perceive, the next thing to experience. So people are not aware of this cessation, this what we call the insight into cessation. And this is what cessation means in Buddhism, the third noble truth. Everything right before your eyes is ceasing. This is very powerful because it teaches you to let go. When you hold on to something in the mind and you get caught up in it, and then you watch it until you see it cease from the mind, then it gives you a tremendous amount of liberation from that thing. So something worries you and disturbs you and maybe a very real thing. But when you watch that perception change and you see a kitten and you go and play with the kitten, and then that perception is gone from your mind, the suffering from it is gone from your mind. And now you're playing with the kitten. So the temptation is for ordinary people to try to trade off the unpleasant experiences and get more of the pleasant experiences. But of course, it's still part of that exact same system of latching onto one perception after another perception after another perception. And the mindful person, the meditator, starts to realize it's this process itself that is the problem, latching onto these different perceptions. As you start to notice that the process itself is what's wrong, what starts to appear before the mind, into experience, is that moment where you are released from the entire process of consciously engaging different objects, one after another, after another. And this experience itself is also experience, make no mistake, but it's fundamentally a different kind of experience. Now it is not an experience of thinking of something, of wanting something, of liking something, something you hear, see, taste, smell, touch, eat, make love to. It's none of those things. It's this raw, naked, clear consciousness that starts to arise when you put everything down, when you stop getting caught up in these projections. So the quotation that I have up on the screen there, Samsara is the mind turned outwardly, lost in its projections. We should understand that in Buddhism, when we talk about an idea occurring to the mind that is outside, that is considered outwardly into a projection. So for many Westerners, we think if I think of something that's inside, and if I look at something that's outside, that's a valid way to understand your experience if you wish. But in Buddhism, no. We're talking about this mind latching onto one thing after another thing. And that may be a thought, maybe a memory, maybe a sight, maybe a sound, doesn't matter. Well, what happens if you stop this entire process of being caught up in projections and perceptions? What happens is the mind turns inward and starts to see, in this quotation, its own true nature, or your own true nature. So in Theravada Buddhism, we don't talk too much about what that true nature is. We talk about the process of stopping getting caught up in the projections. I'm going to jump on. So I found a description of this process in a book on Zen Buddhism, and that should be appearing on your screen right now. It says this vacant and open field is intrinsically present from the very beginning. By the way, this is translated from an ancient Zen master. I very much doubt he used words like intrinsically, but you know, we put it up into our own language. You must purify and wipe away the various deluded conditioning and illusory habits. I like this because in Zen, they very often talk about the original nature and as if you are already enlightened. Well, you're not enlightened. You have deluded conditioning and illusory habits. By the way, if I keep looking over to that side, it's because my main screen is on that side and that's where I can read from. Naturally, you will arrive at a place that is clear and pure, perfect and bright, totally empty, without any image. It's resplendent, outstanding, and does not rely on anything. Only this vastness can illuminate the fundamental reality as external objects are relinquished. So this is a statement from Zen Buddhism, which points to the exact same part of mind that I'm pointing to. The mind continually reaching out to here it says external objects. Now that's pure Theravada. That's exactly the way that we call objects of the mind or objects of perception or objects of consciousness. These are all considered to be external, or the mind reaching out to those things. One reason I like this particular statement is because it makes clear that when the mind stops this process of perceiving things, there is still experience. And nobody really explained that to me when I was young and starting out on this path. I'm still young. I'm 53. That's still young, right? Until I came to Thailand, and my teacher here would point to this brightness of mind, which he said you must concentrate on. And so I was trying to create with my mind something very bright. And he kept saying to me, no, it's not something you do with your mind. And that confused me for many years until the mind just stops. When you stop doing anything, then this experience starts to arise by itself. It still takes work because you have to hold the mind or restrain the mind from going out to things. Because let's face it, you want to sit there and think. When you do your meditation and you sit down, yes, I'm going to meditate. But part of your mind goes, I'm going to meditate, but I'm also going to think about dinner, children, wives, husband, future, stories, hovercraft, boats. I've been busy designing boats in my mind. I got very into naval architecture since lockdown. I've been watching all these stupid YouTube videos. And my mind wants to think about that and not meditate. So it takes a tremendous effort to hold the mind in this kind of limbo process. But you're not creating a particular thought or idea or vision or sound or anything like that. So then he says, naturally you arrive at this place that is clear, pure, perfect, and bright. I really want to emphasize this because when the process of perceiving things collapses, the immediate thing that you do is you find something to think about, something to see, smell, taste, touch, something to work at, something to do. We are not human beings, we are human doings. And so you miss that pure, perfect, bright state of mind that starts to arise. I've even seen yogis who have gone to teachers and described this exact experience. And the teacher has said, no, you're getting caught up in some state of mind. You should be watching the breath. Completely missing the point that their mind was attaining into the right way already. If you're not expecting it, if nobody has talked about it, then you don't recognize it when it starts to arise. So I think this is very important that we can talk about this, what the actual experience is. You are still, in fact, I would say experience becomes brighter, clearer, sharper, more knowing, more present. And when the mind starts to go away into a perception about something dumb, some politics, story, thing in your life, some worry about something, which I keep repeating, may be very real and important, you can feel the mind leaking off. You can feel the mindfulness deserting you and latching onto that thing. And it becomes so clear. There is an insight called knowing what is the path and what is not the path. Unfortunately, in Buddhism, it doesn't describe what that is. So I can only say you can point to it in your experience. But when you attain to that mind that is vast and clear, then it is very clear when a base perception is arising to try and absorb your attention. It's almost like trying to steal your attention off you. Now, this experience, is it outside of your experience as a daily meditator and yogi? In my view, this is something that tickles us. It comes at you from the past, from sometime in your past, you've had an inkling of this pathway. And that's what's driving your spiritual aspiration. Certainly for myself, when I started to make some attainments in meditation, I recognized very clearly experiences I'd had when I was a child, which I'd lost when I became an adult. So this gateway or this pathway, I believe, has opened up for everybody, and you've seen it, you've tasted it, you've had experiences of it. And the first thing you do when you put your feet on it is you fill it with some thought, perception, and you ruin it. It's very hard to hold yourself in that limbo, in that vastness, because that's the way you've trained yourself from very young. You're always filling yourself up with some perception. So there are times, often times of desperate suffering. Suffering as the nature, it stops the delusion in your mind. It's very hard to worry about Coronation Street or soap operas when you're really suffering and when you're in pain. When we're not suffering and in pain, that's when you find it very easy just to relax and lose yourself. It's hard to read a book or a story when you're really suffering and in pain. Suffering has that nature. It yanks you out of that unconscious state. So that is from the Zen. Now I wanted to bring up for you the image of the world turtle. You can see it on Wikipedia, so it must be real. And the world turtle is an image that is has been in India, in China, and in North America. And it's an image of the turtle carrying the world on its back. And this image is very common throughout mythologies. And I really love this picture that I'm showing you right now. Hopefully that you can see it. Because it says the cosmic turtle is the belief that the world is supported by a giant turtle. Now you should see why I find that amusing. The four elephants, which are often depicted, it seems, I'm not quite sure what they represent. And I'm not sure if they're a later addition to the idea or not. All of the images that I could find for the turtle carrying the world on its back are modern day interpretations. And so they very often are wrong or they miss the point. So why is the world carried on the back of a turtle? A turtle has 6 protuberances. I'm going to say limbs. It's obviously the head is not a limb, but let's say limbs. Has the front legs, the back legs, a head and a tail. That is 6 different ways in which it moves around. And that is how the mind moves around with its 6 different senses, things that it can see, smell, taste, hear, touch, and think about. And the mind latches onto one of those things after another of those things after another continually. So the entire world, everything in the world can be summed up by these 6 core experiences. And the reason the turtle is the symbol of the meditation then is what happens when the turtle brings in all of its 6 limbs. Then the new attainment can be attained to. The entire world, everything in the entire world, every experience that you can ever possibly have, all the thoughts and ideas and histories and wars and nuclear bombs and beautiful things and loves and whatever, all of it can be carried on the back of a turtle. 6 core basic experiences of the consciousness leaping from one thing to another thing to another thing. When the turtle withdraws its limbs, then in fact the world disappears. Now the reason the turtle, I think partly is because the shell of a turtle looks something like a map, right? Bearing in mind ancient cultures probably weren't counting the world as a hemisphere or as a globe, but the shell of a turtle looks something like a map. So that's another reason why the turtle lends itself to this analogy or this metaphor. And another reason is the turtle swims in the ocean, and water is always a symbol of consciousness. And consciousness that is lost or is caught up in sense desire is always compared to the ocean. The ocean is filled with evil, nasty things that are about to get you. It's filled with monsters that you can't see. Especially in Australia, you have so many awful things. I was reading the other day about the carpet shark, something like a Wollongong shark. Have you seen the carpet shark? Look it up. It's this evil, monstrous thing that lies flat on the seabed, totally disguised, and has all little furry things that grow from its chin to make it look like it's part of the seafloor fauna. And it swishes its tail to attract you towards it, and then it bites you. What kind of evil God has thought up such a monstrous, diabolical creature? I can't imagine. And why do Australians go swimming all the time? In the old days, when they made maps, they would draw a map of the people, of the land, and the ocean bit. They used to write 3 words: there be monsters. Everything evil that's out to kill you lives in water. Like there's frogs and bacteria and corals, and everything lives in the water is going to kill you. So I realized that being a city-bred pom, I'm probably a little out of tune with the Australians. But that's what the sea represented, always represents in all mythologies. The sea is something filled with dark and nasty monsters that you can't see, that are out to get you. The more that you purify consciousness, then the consciousness is being compared to like pure water or stream water or a mountain pool. So the more and more you purify consciousness, that's when the stories will use analogies and metaphors of purified water. So the turtle swims around in the sea of sense desires as its normal life, and the entire world then can be encapsulated by that image. Our job as a meditator, what happens when the mind stops going on to perceptions one after the other, after another? Just for fun, I've put up another image of a turtle carrying the world on its back, a more modern day representation, because people don't understand these stories and symbols. They don't know what they mean, so they turn it into something silly. So here you have a nice, pretty little garden with mushrooms and love hearts, and that wasn't what was meant by the turtle carrying the world on its back. This original picture I showed you, the cosmic turtle, is the belief that the world is supported by a giant turtle? No. People didn't believe the world was supported by a giant turtle. The turtle is a metaphor, and it's an analogy for something that can be used for the spiritual attainment. In philosophy, by the way, on Wikipedia, it says for the world turtle. Turtles, this is the regress argument in epistemology, the argument of infinite regress, often expressed as turtles all the way down. Because in philosophy, they say, well, what is the turtle standing on? Another turtle. What is that turtle standing on? Another turtle, etc., etc. Meaning that you can't escape the mind. That's why philosophers are not enlightened. They don't know what they're talking about. The turtle was a very clear, powerful symbol for what we are doing in practice. Now, I might ask you what you think the elephant stands for. I'm guessing it stands for the 4 elements. So the 4 elements of fire, air, fluidity or water, and heat. What is it? Earth, heat, fire, water. I think that's what the 4 elephants are, but I can't be sure. So to wrap up, I want to finish with a statement from Theravada Buddhism. Since we've done Tibetan and we've done Zen, I want to bring it back home to Theravada Buddhism. And what I put up on the screen is actually a saying from the Theravada, which is the enlightenment expressions of the elder males. So it was separated into 2 books, the enlightened men and the enlightened women. Often the women ask me, well, what did the enlightened women say? They want to have these teachings from a woman. Let me tell you, it makes absolutely no difference whatsoever. the statements from the enlightened men and the enlightened women in these two books, if I took 20 statements from each book, you wouldn't know which was male and which was female. It makes no difference. Enlightenment is enlightenment. So this particular book was from the statement, was the expression of one of the Thera, one of the enlightened monks of the Buddha. He said, I've given up the 6 spheres of contact. My sense doors are guarded and restrained. I've ejected the root of suffering. I have attained the end of defilements. So very simple, very clear, very direct. Sense contact is this process of perceiving things, one after the other after another. My sense doors are guarded and restrained is very important, because the path of Buddhism is one of, or the path of enlightenment is one of restraint. So what we are doing is not creating an experience. We're not creating a perception or light or fairies or infinite space or anything like that. The mind itself will reveal itself as it is. We don't need to create that in any kind of way. The only thing you need to be careful of is not letting the mind get caught up in this process of perceiving things. It becomes very clear that it's perceiving things, this process of consciousness, that causes suffering. When you stop perceiving things, the suffering ceases. Now, how far can you take this? I don't know. Apparently, when you die or when you get enlightened, well, we can speculate about. But certainly within your experience, you can experience this brightness and vastness of the mind, and it becomes very clear. All the suffering arises from perceiving things. When I'm not perceiving things, I'm brighter, clearer, sharper, more aware, more mindful. I'm touching, I'm riding on the rainbow of the life force itself. And I've attained the ending of defilements. This is important because one of the accusations placed against Theravada Buddhism from Zen Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism is that Theravada tells you to be a very, very good boy or girl, and the better and better you make yourself, the more and more enlightened you get. And this idea that you become perfect. And this is nonsense. You can't do that. However much of a good person you make yourself become, according to Buddhist philosophy and mythology and cosmology, the best that you can hope for is to be reborn in a heavenly realm, and not even a high heavenly realm. A pleasant heavenly realm is the best that you can get to by trying to iron out or end your defilements by correcting your behavior. You will never get to the end of your defilements in this way. But by exiting from this process of perceiving things, the ending of defilements can be attained, can be touched upon. And you can see this and know this in your own experience. I'm not talking about something that may happen to you in 10 lifetimes when you become enlightened. I'm talking about something that you can see and touch on in your own practice. So that's the end of what I wanted to say today. The floor is open if anybody would like to ask questions. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I'd like to ask about enlightenment or Nibbana and Theravada, because we hear those terms so much, but I have no idea still after all these years what exactly they mean, or if there is a clear meaning. In Zen, they don't use the term enlightenment, they use the term awakening, meaning what you're trying to do is be fully conscious. And the original nature doesn't mean that you're already enlightened, but you just don't know it. It means that you have original nature that's unconditioned, that preceded what your parents taught you, what your education taught you, what your society taught you, and that you're trying to get back to that unconditioned self so that you can then proceed with your life in a more conscious, whole way. But there's two main branches of Zen. One is Rinzai, where they have the goal of enlightenment, and you try to get to that through the koans and meditation. But the Soto Zen branch, which is more popular in the West, says, don't worry about enlightenment. Just sit in order to sit, and study in order to study. And if you reach the Torii one day, that's great, but don't think of it as a goal. But it does seem to be the goal in Theravada, and as far as I know, in Tibetan Buddhism. But what is that goal? What is that enlightenment or Nibbana that we're trying to reach?
Okay, there's about 6, 7 things in there, which I can't quite remember what they all were, but the term for enlightenment that you talk about, awakening, the original term was the Sambodhi, which we also translate as awakening. And in the Dhammacakka Sutta, the Buddha says he attains to Sambodhi Nibbana, so awakening and enlightenment. What we translate as enlightenment really is about 40 or 50 different words and phrases that the Buddha used. There wasn't a single word. Sambodhi, awakening, is definitely one of the most common that he used. Nibbana was less common. He would also use words like the goal, or one of the common words that he used was one who has attained to the end of the outflowings, which is the outflowings of the mind, going out in sense desire, in becoming, in views and opinions. And so when the outflows have stopped, he called that enlightenment, kinasavat, the end of the outflows. So there's about 40 different words that he used, many of them negative, as in what it is not. So Nibbana had the sense of putting out. So putting out the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. For example, Sambodhi, awakening, has a more positive thing of saying what it is rather than what it isn't. So the point is, I think, not to get too confused with these words. There is that goal, there is that thing to point towards. And if you haven't got it, the Buddha said, go to the roots of trees and caves and meditate as if your hair is on fire. And keep working until you have attained that thing which you have not attained, until you have known that thing that you don't know. So he was very Indian, the Buddha. When Buddhism got to China and Japan especially, became very much more earthy and holistic, and things were couched in much more pleasant terms. The Indian form of Buddhism was very kind of severe, in my opinion. I often hear these teachings in an Indian accent, and it kind of makes a bit more sense. So yeah, that was, and what you said about original nature, that's exactly right. That's what the idea is. You use the word unconditioned, which is another one of these 40, 50 words that the Buddha used. But he did say that you can attain to or touch upon the unconditioned. And until you know and dwell in the unconditioned, then you still have work to do. That's what he said. But unconditioned, asankata dhamma, a dhamma which has no conditions or restrictions put upon it, is exactly, in fact, is what was spoken about in this quote that I put up on the screen. Which itself is a Zen quote, where the mind will arrive in a place that is clear, pure, perfect, and bright, totally empty, without any image, resplendent and outstanding. It does not rely on anything. So that is the experience or the dwelling in which we have to go and sit. And if we don't, we're not enlightened. If we do, then we are. And that's all there is to it. To say to sit around and not do anything is one of those things that's true but not right, right but not true. If I don't do anything, make any intention, my mind just lapses into dreams about hovercraft and boats and planes and TV shows. That's what it's going to do. And I see so many teachers, especially in Theravada Buddhism, who say just let things be there, allow them to, don't fight them, don't attract. No, that's not that's not it. You have to put in that effort. You have to practice that restraint, because that's not enlightenment. It's not the path. On the other hand, it's not, when you rest in this bright, pure, awakened consciousness, that's not something that you are doing. If you're doing something, that's putting restraints. It's another idea or vision. It's another light. It's another philosophy, another sound, or something that you're creating with the mind. And if you're creating something with perception, what you end up with is just a perception. So to rest in that, you can't be doing anything. But be aware, not doing anything is being in a state of heightened, deliberate, clear equipoise that is so bright and self-knowing and self-conscious. And it's so clear when your mind starts to fall out of that state that the whole path becomes crystal clear. Anyway, that's as much as the things that you said. You said several things, Joe, all of which I think were very much spot on. But those are the couple of things that I picked up on to respond to.
Thank you.
I should say, these two schools of Zen, I don't think there's really any difference. I'm reading a Zen book right now, and it talks about this. When you're in a koan, the koan takes your mind to that empty space. A koan, like, what is it? There's nowhere else your mind can move to. So it leads you into that equipoise of that luminous, clear, non-action, non-doing, just as much as silent illumination practice does. Theravada was much more mechanical, but I want to make clear that there is only one door. There is only one enlightenment. There is only one door. There's only one thing that lies outside of everything else. And whatever words that we use to get towards that, well, that's fine. If you read some of the Christian books, they also point to the very same thing. Read The Cloud of Unknowing. It's a wonderful textbook on how to deal with the thinking mind. Or St. John of the Cross, he talks about the dark night of the soul, where the mind withdraws from all things and rests in union with God. Because God is something you can't think about, you can't understand, you can't perceive. So there is only one door, there is only one experience. And for me in my own practice, personally, now that I know where that is and what that is, I do not need any more teachings or teachers. Somebody said to me recently, why don't you go and, in fact, this was Mary, some of you know her, said, why don't you go off for a few years and do a retreat with a really good teacher? Like, I don't need it, the teacher now, because I know what it is. I know I put my foot through the doorway. I'm not enlightened. I haven't gone through yet. I still have all kinds of crazy desires and schemes and plans, but I know where it is now. So I have no more need for those things. We have like 10 minutes. So short and sharp, if anybody has comments, not just questions, but comments or queries on topic or off topic. Hey, nice to see you, Evan. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Pandit. It was a good talk. I thought it was funny you brought up the chickens, because my neighbor decided to get a rooster a couple of months ago.
Oh, man.
But it's actually strict laws here about having roosters. So I just went to the local council and they took care of it for me. But it'd be like, I'm a pretty early riser, 5 a.m. and that's sort of my peaceful time in the morning. And there was this bloody rooster and it just ruined my entire day, and I would go to work thinking about this rooster. But it's just incredible how something so small can really have that effect on you. So I just, and it, but, even the fact that I'm a meditator, it still bothers me, you know what I mean? It still comes up, that annoyance. But I guess it's something
But it's screeching at you. If a human being comes around and starts screeching like that, it's going to get your attention and annoy you. I don't know why people don't get annoyed at the chickens, but Thais seem to like it for some reason.
They're not as annoying, the chickens, but roosters, they're just, it's a whole another level. But you have a very good talk. It was very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Bill. Take your computer off mute.
Thank you very much for this evening. Seen you a few times now. You're always very interesting. I'm fairly new to Buddhism, even though I'm getting a bit on the older side. Have you ever met anybody who's claimed to be enlightened?
Okay. People don't usually claim to be enlightened. And if they do, that's probably a very good indicator that they're not. And I've met a few of those, believe me. Quite a few of those. Tell you a silly story. There was a guy who came to the monastery and he claimed to see our original abbot who died in the 60s in a vision in front of him, and this abbot was giving him teachings. And like, psychic stuff happens. I'm not one to judge. I don't know. I'm not going to tell him he's right or wrong. If he wants to come and practice, then let him do so. But he caused trouble. He got into a big argument with the monks because they told him he was burning one candle, and they said, no, you have to light 2 candles and 3 incense. He said, I want 1 candle and 1 incense. And anyway, I threw him out in the end. And then he came back a year later. He caused trouble. I threw him out again. He went to Wat Pan Anachat and they threw him out of there. And then he came, I'd moved temples to Bangkok and he came here. I said, no way you're coming here, out. And he caused trouble everywhere he went. And so 3 times I'd actually thrown him out of the temple and myself. And then one day he turns up, knocks on my door, and he's like, I'm here. I'm like, God's sake, I thought I got rid of you years ago. And he said, but you told me to come here. And I'm, what? He said, yeah, you came to me in a vision and you told me to come here and meditate with you. Oh my God. Now I can tell you for sure, your visions are complete rubbish. Go away. Yeah, when people claim to have experiences, very often they don't. But there are people that we understand to be enlightened. There are 2 things here I want to say. One is that there is enlightenment as a temporary experience. In Theravada, it was called Jnana, Jeda Vimutti Jnana Dasana. So seeing and knowing the liberation of the mind or the heart, the citta. And that's a temporary experience. And so that can be had. I know many people who have attained to and work with that. And then there's being enlightened as in being a full arahant. There will never be any more suffering arising again. There are people we suspect or we believe to be fully enlightened, but how can you tell? One of them was Papaji, who I went to see in India. I have every confidence that he was enlightened, and he was quite lovely to be around, actually. But the question is, what good does it do you? People would hover around him and believe he's enlightened and pretty much worship him and construct philosophies out of things that he said that he didn't say. So he'd say something like, don't worry about anything. And then they would go away and say, oh, well, we can just have sex and take drugs and let's have a big orgy. And Papaji said, don't worry about anything. Well, that's not what he meant. So I've seen quite a lot of that going on. The reason why the Buddha, or a Samma Sambuddha, fully enlightened Buddha, in terms of mythology, the thing that makes him a perfectly enlightened Buddha, or is because he can clearly explain the path. He understands the mechanics of what's happened. Whereas some of these people we consider to be arahants actually get a bit confused and a bit garbled with the things that they say sometimes, because they're not fully enlightened. But I want to stress the enlightenment itself is the same no matter who you are. The character that's left over, that's speaking to people, that depends upon your cultural background. So the Buddha was Indian, he was very Indian. If he'd been Chinese, he would be very Chinese. But that's different to the actual unconditioned, that point of the mind that is separate or free from any kind of perception.
Very interesting. Thank you.
We don't talk very much in Theravada about what enlightenment is like. And so this is where I've enjoyed some of the other texts by other mystics, both from Zen and Tibetan and Christianity, and especially Advaita, one of the Hindu Vedanta schools. They talk much more positively, like of what the experience is, rather than what the experience isn't. In philosophical terms, it's called cataphatic and anaphatic. Anaphatic means you describe something in terms of what it isn't, and cataphatic means you describe something in terms of what it is. So I could describe the Australian rugby team as something that didn't beat England in the last game of rugby. It's describing what it isn't. I could describe cricket as something that isn't in any way, shape or form remotely interesting to any intelligent human being. That's what cricket is, or what cricket isn't. In my view, I don't get cricket. I really, truly don't. But to describe something in terms of what it isn't, like I can describe water in terms of it isn't solidity, it has no solid form to it. That's describing what it isn't. I could describe water in what it is. It's something that flows into the form of whatever is containing it. So in the same way, enlightenment can be talked about in terms of what it isn't. And it isn't latching onto any of these perceptions that arrive one after the other in the mind. It isn't greed, hatred, or delusion. It isn't defiled. There's all these descriptions. But what it is very hard to describe. I mean, it's kind of supposed to be beyond words. So the descriptions of what it are rather few. But that's why I do like to continually bring back to point out that there is an experience in the mind that is the correct experience of self-knowing, bright, clear, aware, unperturbed is a word the Buddha used, so unwavering, that you can experience even as an unenlightened person, but is very clear that's what it is. Don't distrust your own experience.
Right. Thank you, Bhante. Thank you so much.